Okay, so I'm in Acts chapter 10, and Peter's getting this vision. Chapter 10, verses 9 to 16. Peter's on the housetop praying, and he sees this great linen sheet being let down, and on the sheet there's all these it says four-footed creatures and creeping things of the earth, and a voice came to him, "Rise, Peter, slaughter and eat." And Peter says, "Not at all, Lord, because never have I eaten anything defiled and unclean." And then the voice says to him, he says, verse 15, "You stop calling defiled the things God has cleansed." And then the rest of the chapter goes on where he has an encounter with Cornelius. And verse 34, Peter says, "For certainty I perceive that God is not partial, but in every nation the man that fears him and works righteousness is acceptable to him." So it becomes obvious to Peter and the disciples at this point that God is reaching out to the Gentiles, that the Jews that killed Christ are not the ones that are going to alone get salvation, but that God is opening the door to everybody that wants to accept the sacrifice of Christ, that there is salvation. Before, the Gentiles were considered unclean, but God told Peter through this vision, stop calling what God has cleansed unclean. So when I was reading this, and reading it together with John and Acts, it became so obvious to me. It hit me, the other sheep. Jesus was talking about salvation being available to the Gentiles, and these are the other sheep. But I couldn't see that when I was a Jehovah's Witness, because I had drilled in my brain these concepts of the other sheep living forever on the earth, and the little flock are going to heaven. So it was a completely different concept to me. Just to explain this a little further here. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that everybody that died before Jesus Christ cannot go to heaven. I'm not fully understanding this concept. They have an earthly hope. They have no chance to go to heaven. They believe after Christ paid the sacrifice that the opportunity to go to heaven was opened up. They believe that the New Testament, the early Christians, were primarily all anointed. All of them were, if not every single one, the majority, were all going to be going to heaven. They believe the message of the Apostle Paul and most of the New Testament is only for those that are going to heaven, those that are anointed, those that are part of the new covenant with Jesus Christ. And I'm going to talk in the future about this new covenant belief. So if Paul was writing, or if the New Testament was written for mostly just the anointed, because that's what they all were at the time, then you have to admit or see that all the Gentiles or other sheep were going to heaven, and that is not what Jehovah's Witnesses teach, but that is what the Bible is saying. If I said that right. So I'm just going to go back to Revelation 7 verse 9 here. There's another point I'm trying to make, but I'm not thinking it right now. Revelation 7 verse 9, where John says, "After these things I saw and look a great crowd, which no man was able to number, out of all nations and tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, dressed in white robes." So this great crowd that John sees is made up of Jews and Gentiles. The expression little flock, they say, is just applying to those going to heaven. When Jesus said little flock, was he referring to the Jews, the faithful Jews, literal faithful nation of Jews? Jehovah's Witnesses take the little flock in a spiritual way. They believe that the ones that go to heaven are made up of Gentiles and faithful Jews. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that the Bible is giving an earthly hope and a heavenly hope, but there's other sheep that are going to heaven. Both of these classes are mixed for both of these hopes. You can't split it, other sheep and little flock, and say that only the other sheep are living on the earth, and only the little flock I'm not sure about the little flock because when I read that in Luke, I'm still a bit I'm still a little bit confused with that verse. But anyways, that's it for that topic.